Okay. By my watch, it is 8 o'clock. I'm an engineer, so I don't really do late. So it's 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. It's January the 17th on Wednesday, 2024. If you're joining me live, then thanks very much for doing so. There's a comments function here, so I do believe in terms of interfacing with it, you would be able to comment as well. If you're watching it on a record, which most people will do, people check in afterwards, then thanks for stopping by. The topic this evening is how to build a resilient business. And I want to talk specifically about niching or generalizations in terms of the market that you attack and the approach you take to that, what I think you should do, some pointers as to what I think you should and shouldn't do and why. There's a lot talked about in terms of niches and generalist approaches. Obviously, the obvious one is about a trade-off that takes place when you niche down. You say goodbye to a wider breadth of opportunities, perhaps, and maybe you limit yourself. And there's a temptation to do that. I said in an article I wrote recently that it's not a binary choice whether you're a generalist or niche. I think it probably is actually, and I'll go into that. This will take about 20 minutes to half an hour. Just really want to open up my thought process around what happens when you niche or when you stay in a generalist sort of position strategically, what that means for businesses, and I've got some evidence to back up why I think the way that I do. Now, I work with companies to help them long term, so I work operationally with companies on a fractional basis to help them with strategy, with operations, with finance, and the whole holistic piece in terms of operating a business effectively to make it the most it can be. I work with businesses now. I've run businesses in the past, and so I think I'm qualified to have at least an opinion on this, and I'm there to be shot down by putting myself in front of the camera and offering that opinion up. So I will share some slides with you, and I will go into some detail as to why I think the way that I do about this particular topic. So how to build a resilient business, niche or generalist. Now, I'll start with a little backdrop as to the context of this. Now, I find this a really interesting graph. It's not my graph. Maybe it's because I'm an engineer that I find this interesting. But what this is actually showing, this is government information. This is UK government information. And this is the last complete calendar year that's available, as I understand. So this is 2022. And what this shows is the percentage of registered companies and their age. So there are around 5.5 million registered companies in the UK. And going by this data, around 15% of those are less than a year old. And over a third, so about 37% on this graph, are between 1 and 4 years old. And then the alarming thing is it starts to tail off then. You get this real then drop off. So between 5 and 9 years, you're talking about just over 20%. So to get to 10 years, if you add up all of the bars for the percentage of companies that exist that are less than 10 years old, you get 3/4 of companies. So the truth is, in 2022, at any given time, there was around 300,000 companies that were either being dissolved or being compulsorily or voluntarily liquidated. So companies were ending. 300,000 companies a year were ending. And yes, you could argue that there's changes to how many new companies are created, and it goes up and down. But this is a good proxy for how long companies live for. So the reality is that almost 3/4 of companies don't make it to 10 years. So if you're building a business and you aspire to pass on that generational wealth to children, or you want to sell and make a big exit, or you want to continue sort of in perpetuity, then that's not the norm. You get to 20 years on this, and you're at 1 in 10. So 90% of companies don't get to 20 years, but 3/4 don't get even to 10 years. So companies establish themselves. You look around you, and I look around me, and I see companies that are very busy, doing all these important things, and you kind of get this imposter syndrome, and you assume that everybody else has got it figured out, and they're building their empires, and that they will all go on and be successful. But the reality is that in 10 years from now, over half the companies that are registered today won't exist anymore. So there's a huge churn effect that's going on. And it just goes to show that people or companies are not able to actually sustain any sort of success, or a lot of them are not. You get these big institutions that sit there in 50, 100 years or so, but they're real outliers. Once you get to 50 years, you're 1 in 100 companies that actually get that far out and are able to be successful. So, just to give you those figures that I've just talked about, UK business lifespans. Like I said, some businesses get bought, some businesses get dissolved for other reasons. But generally speaking, if you're closing a business down, it's because it's not doing what it was designed to do and what you aspired for it to do when you started it. And obviously, if it's being liquidated, either compulsorily or voluntarily, then something has gone wrong as well. So the vast majority of those companies are closing down because effectively they haven't performed and they haven't done what they were intended to do. So they are, failed companies, if you like. I don't want to sort of tag them with that term, but you know what I mean. So 4 in 10 businesses don't make it to 3 years. This gets more positive, by the way. This is just the opening gambit, really. 3 in 10 make it to 10 years. Less than 1 in 10 make it to 20 years. And the actual average age of a business in the UK has come down from around 10 and a half years, I think, at the turn of the century, to around 8.5 years now. So that is a good proxy for life expectancy for businesses. And I find that pretty sobering to think that people don't go into business generally. We work for how many years, 40 years or whatever it may be. If you're setting companies up, unless you're selling them at huge exits, but if you were doing that and they continue to exist, then they wouldn't form part of the casualty list. So something isn't right there for me. Something is going wrong that's creating this huge drop-off and this kind of this curve effect that you're seeing in the population of businesses that we have in the UK. So what do they die of? And again, like I said, this will get more positive. Well, you can look in the trade press, you can look at postmortems in corporate publications as to why businesses didn't survive. And if you've been around long enough and you talk to enough people, you get a feel for reasons for why businesses don't survive. Things like lack of leadership and improper planning, ignoring customer needs, company culture, etc. I could put 50 things on this list. The reality is, I don't really agree with these as individual reasons for why businesses fail. I see these as indicators of something else. The good news about all of these things, and many others that you could put on a list like this, is that these are all within the gift of control of a company. It's within the gift of control of a company to put good leadership in place. It's within their control to actually put proper planning controls in, to focus intently on customer needs, to build a positive culture, to manage growth so that it's not unsustainable. That's the good news. These are all within our control. And what I think tends to happen is that the companies create success. They find a niche, and I'll talk about niches in a minute because that's really what this is all about. They find a niche, but they're not able to sustain the success in that niche. So really, what do businesses die of? It's adaptation. They're not able to adapt in the market, or the lack thereof of adaptation. If you can't do that, then you can't survive long term. And that's why I think we see this peak. People jump on opportunities. The market's forever changing, and companies, they spring up because of some short-term opportunity, and then they all get washed out as the tide goes out, and then they disappear and something else comes along. And do you really want to be one of those companies, or do you want to create something with enduring appeal, which fulfills an enduring requirement in such a way that you can actually be here for the long term? That would be certainly my argument. In terms of the demographic of companies, about 99% of businesses in the UK are classified as small businesses. So of the 5.5 million that I stated, well over 5 million of those are businesses with between 0 and 49 employees. And I guess you can kind of cut that two ways. On the one side, it's quite challenging because if you've got a small business, then you're more susceptible to changes in the market. Houthi rebels start firing at ships off the coast of Yemen and it affects the supply chain, or you get some crazy political situation arises which pushes interest rates up, and things happen that you're probably more susceptible to than perhaps a big institution that can maybe guard against those things, or can actually hedge against those things and has a bit more fat there to deal with it. The flip side is, though, that those companies are able to be more, if they choose to, and if they build it into the DNA of the company, and that's where I'm going to get to with this whole idea of niching, is that they can be more adaptable, so they can change. They're a smaller ship to turn around, if you like. So, you don't have all the bureaucracy and all of the sort of decision-making processes by committee that happen in large corporates that I've been involved with in the past. In smaller businesses, you can have that agility, and that is so important, I think, to get from being one of those businesses that's around for 5 years to being a business that's around for 20 or 30 years and beyond, and actually being successful in the long term. So where do you start? Well, initially, I think to be successful, before you think about long term, is finding a niche. Now, I kind of pitch this up here as should you be a generalist? Should you niche down onto something? The reality is that the generalist approach is really the preserve of massive companies these days. And when I was a kid, we used to go to the general store in the local town, and there was Woolworths, and there was shops that you would sell all manner of different things, and they were just generalists, and you would source a lot of things locally. These days, everybody's got access to software. They can set companies up. You can do content creation. You can get onto platforms like this, and you can pitch to people all over the world. You can invoice. You can create services. You can create interest. You can find your tribe, if you like. And so if you're a generalist, you're just sitting there waiting to get picked off by people who can come in and actually just nip away and take all of those little bits of specializations and actually collect those up and take them off you. So I don't think we're in a world anymore where you can exist in a sort of generalist state. That's the sort of the preserve of the Amazons and the big traders that we use as platforms now. We don't want to compete with them. We're just using them as channels for distribution. So I think the whole idea of whether you're a generalist or niche, you may disagree with me, but I think that everybody needs to be in a niche. And I think the more specialized you are, actually, the better. It's just the trade-offs that occur when you go into a niche that you have to think very carefully about, because that's the bit I think where people fall down. So the whole concept of an avatar is that if you're in a particular niche, you really want to be as close to the top of the tree as you can get. That's where the profit opportunities are. That's where the key people of influence and the movers and the shakers and the companies that actually affect the particular markets they're in actually get all the lion's share of the opportunities there. So what I would encourage you to do is actually create a vision for what would be the perfect company in your space if it had the perfect technology, the perfect marketing, the perfect processes internally, and the people and leadership and distribution models and everything else. Then what could it achieve? And you can actually sort of define that in terms of financial outcomes and sort of strategic outcomes and be the best you can be. What it doesn't do then is guarantee you long-term success. So niching down, you get rewarded for niching down. We all get rewarded. We go out there and we try and solve problems for clients, for customers. And the better we are at solving those problems, the more successful we become. And if you're lucky enough to have the luxury of time to be able to experiment, then you kick away all of the things that don't work for you, and you start to home in on the things that do. So over time, you actually refine your process down, and you become highly adapted to a particular application. And as you do that, that's where the trade-offs come, and it becomes a little bit dangerous, but maybe less dangerous than being a generalist. So I'll give you an example in nature, and I think there are some sort of parallels with nature, but some things we shouldn't take from nature. This is a Thompson's gazelle, so just bear with me on this example. It's a herbivore, it's a small antelope living on the grasslands of Africa. Now, the problem that this guy has is that everybody eats him. Crocodiles, lions, hyenas, wild dogs, you name it, this is a meal. So this is a highly adapted piece of equipment, can run at 50 miles an hour for 5 kilometers, which is just mind-bending. It can turn on a sixpence. It is incredibly difficult to catch. And that's what allows it to thrive and to survive in an environment where there's a lot of things out there to actually eat it. So, is there anything that can niche down and actually build a business plan to carve out a niche? This is where a cheetah comes in, a highly adapted predator. And it's very similar to a business situation where you've eyed an opportunity and you're actually able to adapt yourself down and specialize to the point where you can actually go and get something that nobody else can get access to. They're either not prepared to go there or they can't go there. You've got a strategy which molds together a whole bunch of competencies, which means you can go and get something that nobody else can go and get. And over 400 meters and on open grassland, the cheetah owns the niche. They can have the gazelle and nobody else can have it. And that's the spoils that they enjoy for being specialized. But they are so highly adapted that there's a vulnerability that comes with that. And I think this is the bit that companies are good at. They're good at niching down. They're good at being rewarded. They naturally niche down because the rewards come as you do so. But you become less and less resilient as you do so. And what I mean by that is when you're specialized for one job and one job only, there's not much that has to change that knocks the balance out for you. So as soon as the grass starts to grow, when it's raining, and these bigger predators get the opportunity to actually stalk onto the gazelle, and the whole idea of speed starts to fall away as an advantage, the cheetah hasn't got anywhere else to go because it's given away all of its weight and all of its strength. So it can't go after bigger game. It's limited on what it can hunt down because it's so specialized on that particular niche. So it doesn't have the adaptability. It's niched down really well, and I encourage you in a business to niche down, because if you don't, you just won't be successful because something else will get there first. And that's the lesson in nature. And that's really, I think, where it stops with the lesson in nature. because a cheetah is a product of evolution. So it evolves very slowly. You get climate change, you get a bad summer, you get something happening that's over 6 months or however long, and they can't evolve quick enough to actually adapt themselves out of that situation. But a good business, then that's the product of design. So we have the luxury of being able to actually build adaptability into our businesses, into the DNA of the business, which means that not only are you highly adapted for a particular application, but as things change, you're then ready to actually change with it. And that's the difference between a business which is successful for 3 or 4 years and then disappears on the back of that curve, and one that actually then kicks on into other things and actually becomes successful longer term. So you come back to the avatar, you build the avatar out first of all, and you have to do that to be successful. And so I would encourage anybody to be niche, to have specialisms, to have a combination of skills or competencies and assets that mean that you can do things that maybe nobody else can do. And that gives you a chance to carve out a niche, to be the cheetah in a particular space. And you can define what that will look like in terms of financials, in terms of profit and efficiencies and solvency and liquidity. And these are things I get involved with all the time, helping to build avatars for companies so that they can envisage what they could be, and then actually go out and become that, or get as close to that as they possibly can. Bearing in mind that an avatar that you create is the perfect version of what a business can be in a certain space. It represents best practice. It represents the latest technology. It represents the best of everything. So it is a moving feast that will continue to evolve and to improve. And it has something you have to revisit. You'll never get there, but the closer you can get to it, the more success you will enjoy. And in so doing, there's some pretty sort of standard categories under which activities would fall: growth, profit, cost control, risk management. There's all sorts of subheadings under these, which would actually form the basis of you becoming a successful company and being more successful than others in your particular space. So for the argument against generalizing and niching, I would say there's a strong argument for absolutely niching down and getting good in that space. But the bit I think that happens then is that companies become successful in a space and then they get lazy, or they get bored, or they get complacent, or they get flabby, and they stop looking around. And so they've enjoyed the success in a certain space. And if you're not able to then adapt and move, then you'll find that the market will move away from you. And I think that's the bit that where companies fall over. When you are adapted in that space, it doesn't take much to go wrong for you to start to get thrown off there. And that's maybe the attraction, and this kind of false attraction and the kind of trap of being a generalist. We'll stay as a generalist and we'll do all sorts of things and we'll serve all sorts of markets. You just don't have the resource to do it. Most small businesses just simply can't do that. You have to be niche. So the game is play niche. It's dangerous, but play niche and make sure you've got the adaptability in there. And I can give you an example or two. And what I would do and what I've done in businesses is really keep a focus on the assets that you have. Defend the assets that you have in the business, whether that's intellectual property, whether it's expertise, whether it's people with certain skill sets, whether it's knowledge, whether it's networks, whether it's physical assets, whether it's it's buildings and machinery, etc. But you'll have assets to defend, but you also want to build and to optimize and to find new assets all the time, because assets are what makes your business valuable, but it's also what allows you to adapt and to move into different things, to have a real good understanding of what they are. And I don't have time to go into all of the sort of minutiae of what this looks like, but there's so many things that you can actually physically do to maximize the adaptability of the company. And I'm not talking about niching down into something. I'm talking about being ready to do other things if you're required. So, for example, take a company like Nokia, who used to make mobile phones. Now, I don't know when smartphones came around. It was probably 20 years ago. Maybe it wasn't even as long as that. So in the early 2000s, we all had phones. They were all big, blocky Nokia phones. And Nokia owned the whole market. So they were a mobile phone manufacturer. And then they nearly got wiped out because Apple came in and Samsung came in and BlackBerry at the time came in, and they flipped out into something else. But came in to wipe these guys out, and they sat down, and rather than sort of allow it to happen, they went back and they looked at what their assets actually were, and they realized that our assets are not, or our competencies are not actually making mobile phones. We have all sorts of networks and skills and abilities and unique knowledge in telecoms. So we're actually going to take what we already have and we're going to repurpose that. And they did that. They got into infrastructure tech in telecoms, and they got involved in developing and deploying 5G. and they spun out basically from being a manufacturer of mobile phones into a telecoms tech company. And they took the existing assets they had and they just redeployed them. And that's, as I see it, that's agility, that's adaptability, because that feast, that gazelle won't be there one day. That gazelle will be something else. Something will change. And if you're not adapted to change with it, then you'll be left behind. And I think that's the bit that the businesses miss. They get the first bit, they get the bit that we have to niche down, that we can't be generalists anymore, that we have to exist in a space where we're highly specialized, and they get so far with it. But then as they go in, they fall into this trap of not realizing that once you're in there, you're so specialized, there's not much that needs to happen before it goes wrong for you. So think about R&D, think about investing profits back into the business, constantly building assets, revisiting this all the time and thinking about what assets can we build, what physical assets, what intellectual assets, what knowledge assets, what network assets can we build to make the business valuable, and to mean that we can actually sort of scan around and see what the opportunities are. Because nobody can tell you what the opportunities are that are going to come up. There's gurus out there who will tell you that they know what the future is, and there's a lot of elections this year, and there's some broad brushstrokes about what's going on in the world, but nobody really knows what those opportunities are. But if you're not positioned to take advantage of them, then whatever they may be, then you're not going to be in a place to sort of to harness those. So having this is about building that flexibility in, as well as niching. So the message that I give and my thought process behind whether you should niche or whether you should be a generalist is absolutely be a niche company, be a specialist, be known for something, own a particular niche, but within that, make sure that you have this ability to redeploy your assets, that you're thinking long term, that you're understanding how locked into things you are, and you're constantly thinking about assets and moving and not standing still. Because if you don't stay hungry, then I think the reality is that you will get found out. And the evidence is there. It's quite clear that companies just drop away. They seem to fall away, and we don't have lots of long-term companies that are successful, that are able to continue to reinvent themselves. So that's my thought process behind that. If you want to talk about that with your own, in terms of your own business, drop me a message, connect with me. Happy to have a chat with you on LinkedIn or via video call or whatever. I'm happy to share ideas and look at opportunities to sort of collaborate and do things for mutual benefit. Like I said, that's my thought process on it. I hope it was worth your time. Thanks for joining me. If you did, if this is recording, then again, thanks for stopping by, and I shall leave the feed there.